You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator and your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor, your host, and with me today is Ranjani Saigal. Ranjani is the executive director of Ekal. Ekal is an organization focused on providing economic development, education, and healthcare services to those living in rural India. We're going to talk with Ranjani about the great work going on in Ekal, especially now given the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and what the organization is doing to combat it. We want to talk to Ranjani about how she came upon this new passion after leaving a career in tech and at MIT. Ranjani, welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for doing this.
Well, we really appreciate your willingness to join us, particularly on such short notice. But we're so concerned about what we're hearing out of India that we wanted to talk with someone leading an organization that's working in the region, and especially in some of the more rural areas. But first, can you tell our audience a little bit about your organization, Ekal, and how it's faring given the challenging times we're experiencing right now?
Yeah, thank you for your concern for India as well. Really, really appreciate it. Ekal Vidyalaya is an organization whose focus is to bring education and empowerment to very rural, remote villages in India. These are villages who may not have a road within 6 kilometers of the village itself. So we have a presence in over 100,000 such rural remote areas where we have been working for over 35 years trying to bring various services into the villages. Our first intervention to bring empowerment into these villages was to run single teacher schools, kind of like Little House on the Prairie kind of schools. We run these schools at $1 a day, and we provide primary education and thus aim to bring basic literacy into the villages. More recently, we have two other arms that we have started, which is health and economic empowerment, where we are providing skill training and business training so that the people in the villages actually get some economic empowerment. The biggest thing about our organization is, I think, the only organization that has a footprint that is in these areas where really no other organization and even government has a really hard time reaching out into these depths. During these COVID times, actually, till recently, our villages were a little bit safe from COVID. And the last round around, we didn't get hit very badly. One of the big things that we had done at that time is, because we have our presence in these villages, we were able to give information to our villagers on how to stay safe during these villages. And a big emphasis was on preventing migrant labor that had gone out into the cities to come back. When they come back, we really taught the villagers how to quarantine people so that really infections don't spread in the villages. And we were so fortunate that at that time we really didn't have an impact of COVID in our villages. But this time around, I think because of the variant, or we don't know why, but it has really been hit bad. And even our villagers have experienced COVID. We have lost a few people in the villages as well. So immediately what we are doing is we are doing three things. One is that we have set up telehealth lifelines, what we call, which is using a telehealth platform. We have set up call centers at the centers of our 30 village clusters where people can call in and get advice. Unfortunately, in these villages, there is no access to medical access to doctors or anything. And so the villagers, not only don't they know what to do, but sometimes are misled, and there's a lot of misinformation of how to treat the problem that is at hand. So we have set up this telehealth helpline where we have over 350 doctors who are constantly monitoring the helpline, and we are answering questions as appropriate. The second thing that we are doing is purchasing oximeters and temperature digital thermometers for the villagers. We have teachers and healthcare workers in the villages, so we are providing the oximeters and thermometers to them so that they can help any of the people who might be experiencing symptoms to really understand their conditions. The third thing that we are doing is providing medicines for symptomatic relief. This is paracetamol, that's like a Tylenol equivalent for fever, antibiotics to control other kinds of infections that might happen while you have COVID, and also put some preventative immune boosting things like vitamin C and zinc, which have been proven to be, at least that's part of the protocol in India, for people who might experience COVID like symptoms. So the three pronged attack has been very helpful. Beyond that, what we are doing is providing information to our villagers, we and countering misinformation. One big problem that is happening in the villages, like everywhere else, is people are very afraid of vaccination and are making resolutions not to take vaccination. So we have put a very big effort in place to encourage our villagers to take vaccinations and to be really beware of the misinformation. We also have these what we call tailoring centers where we are training women to become tailors, and we have given them a contract to make masks, and they are actually creating those masks and distributing it in the rural areas. So information for preventative measures as well has been provided. So we are really hopeful that with all of this, our villagers, I hope, will stay safe.
Ranjani, thank you. Now, India obviously is a massive area, and I'm trying to give our audience a sense of the scale of your operation right now and how you actually go about reaching them.
Great. So, yes, India has 1 billion people. We work in 100,000 villages. India has about 640,000 villages. And in our 100,000 villages, we are impacting about 100 million people. So that is the scale of our organization. So we are in about 10th of the villages that are in India. How do we go about doing this? That's a very, very good question. So we have a huge network that we have created in order to bring our presence into these villages. We don't go into one village, we have a cluster of 30 villages that we put together, and we have a center at that center of 30 villages that where we have workers who provide training to our teachers in the village, and they become the communication conduit with the villages themselves. Then further, we have a center at the district headquarters, which is at the center of 500 villages. So we have a whole network that is in place in this manner. More recently, while in the past, we used to do this very much by bringing people into the centers and providing information. We are very fortunate that technology has really permeated everywhere, and there is much cell phone access, at least basic, at least 2G access that is available with at least one cell phone in most of the villages. And the tool WhatsApp has become very popular, and we have been using that very, very extensively to make the connection. So basically, we have formed what we would call a human chain, so that if there is a volunteer, that volunteer connects to, say, 30 villages and gives the information there. And this villager is in touch with our cluster headquarters, where they get the information from that district headquarters as to what's going on in the state. The state leaders are in touch with the country leaders to understand what's going on. And thus, we have a viral network of, a conduit, a human chain, as we say, that is providing information all around. The medicines and actual distribution of the thermometers, etc., is sent into those cluster headquarters. We mail them into the cluster headquarters, and they are delivered into the villages by the workers, actually using a motorbike. They're given a motorbike, and they go into the villages and provide it to our volunteers who are in the villages. And these volunteers have a good connection within the village, and they monitor all that is going on in the village. And they also serve as the conduit between any villager who might have a challenge to, for example, connecting with our telehealth line. So there is a big infrastructure and network that is put in place, and that has been very, very effective in providing information, countering misinformation, and providing services into the villages.
Ranjani, most of our listeners will never get to visit India. And what I'd like you to do is just give us all a sense of what constitutes a village. If we were to go to one, what would we experience? What are we going to see?
Beautiful question. And let me try to paint a word picture for you. When you go into a village, often you will see a wonderful cow. Cow is very central to our village and central to the economy of the village. So when we see some area that has some trees, some greenery, and a cow, immediately in my own mind, I will say, oh, that is a village. Often, many of these villages don't have a firm, like a concrete home, but there will be thatched huts that people live in. They take hay and make huts out of that. The huts, probably for a family of four, will be of a size of 8 by 8, very small huts. And water is often not available through pipes and things like that. There might be two ways of getting water. One is there might be a little well that is dug close by, a central community well where the people might go draw water. Sometimes the government has had like a central tap, a water tap that comes into the village, one tap per village. Sometimes, of course, if there are rivers close by, then people go get water from the village. And even for the children that come to our schools, actually, we run our schools in the afternoon because many of these children have to work at home. They have to take care of their cattle. They have to go get water. Young children, particularly girls, often have to walk and carry water in 2 buckets and bring it back home. But the one thing I would like to tell all of you is that the villagers are the most kind and compassionate people. You will not believe it. You will go into a thatched hut village. They will invite you and offer you a meal, and they will say that it is their privilege to feed you instead of
Wow.
saying that it is, we feel that it is our honor to go there, but they really feel the sense of love. And despite having very little, the smiles and the happiness on their faces is just incredible. We think they have so little, but they make us feel like we have so little. So, people wise, very happy people, very content people, but lots of resources missing in the village.
So, how many families might we see living in a village? Give me some idea of a range.
So in our villages, which are small, these are hamlets, the ones that we are working on because they are in very rural areas. So we would say we have about 200 families in a small village. So we say with about 4 people per family, on an average. So we would say it's 800 to 1,000 members in that village.
And they'll have one school, I suspect.
Yes, exactly. So our Ekal school is in the village itself. But now, more recently, government schools are also coming, but they may not be in the village. People have to walk a little bit, maybe a couple of kilometers, to go to a school that might be nearby.
Do Americans contribute much to the work that you're doing there, and how so?
Very much so. Two ways they have been contributing. One has been, of course, financial support. I mean, we certainly, we run these schools at the dollar a day cost, and the school that goes not just to pay our teachers, which is actually a very, very minimal cost, but also it allows us to get a presence, a footprint in the village. It's not easy to go into a village and start working. You can't do that remotely. We really need to establish trust. We need to establish connections. And so the funding of these schools allows us to do that, so that in a crisis like we are in today, we can instantly go and reach out. So many people have been very generous and they have been supporting our schools. The second interesting way really is that there are many people with great ideas, and that has really helped shape many projects. So for example, there is a big initiative to bring technology into the villages, and we have a thing called Ekal on Wheels, which is a mobile computer lab, which was actually conceived kind of in the West, in America, by some people here at MIT and others. And we got some funding as well, where we have computer training provided to the villagers at their doorstep. This is really helping us bridge the digital divide. And even today, the telehealth program that we have here is a program that came out of Johns Hopkins University, and that is the one that is being implemented in India. And they wanted to partner with us. So, of course, we needed funds. I mean, so funds is also one part of it, but they brought that platform, and that is what is allowing us to run the helpline today. So, America has been great in both bringing technological advancements into the villages as well as providing funding. And more recently, we were actually, before COVID struck, we were bringing tablets into our schools as well to bring curriculum, standard curriculum like Khan Academy into our schools. So we still hope right after the COVID kind of subsides, we will start doing that. So, because especially during times like this, when children cannot go to school, we are really concerned that there's no other options. I know in America, people do online schooling. That's not so easy because people don't have the right devices to do that. So we are really embarking on what we call e-shiksha or e-education program. And again, we have had a lot of help, lot of thought leadership that has come from America.
Ranjani, when I think about the schooling situation, even here in America, young people are certainly going to be a bit behind, many of them, because of the pandemic. Has that affected to some extent what you're able to do, not only in schools, but in general? How have you been able to continue your services given what's going on? And I suspect you have a number of partners that you work with on the ground. And if they're affected, then that obviously affects what you're able to do. So, how have you managed all this?
Again, a great question. In the beginning, last year when COVID struck, everything was in a lockdown. India was really, the lockdown measures were very, very, very impactful and very strict. So at that time, we immediately pivoted our whole work to bringing awareness. The schools were closed, but we were bringing awareness into the villages. And that was great work that we feel very proud that we accomplished. And in fact, it really helped keep the villages very, very safe. Slowly, as the lockdown began to ease, we started bringing our students out into school, but in a different manner, because our schools often also can be run outside because the villages themselves don't have very good building or structure. So sometimes we run it under a tree or in the outside. And so we were doing that in a socially distanced way with masks on. We were doing a lot of oral teaching. These are young children, so our whole curriculum itself actually uses a lot of song and dance to teach math. So they were doing their tables, they were doing a lot of math problems in a very creative way. So we were working, and also another emphasis for our schooling is on the arts and on physical activities. So we used to do a lot of yoga with our children, and more including, even though we need to focus on academics, mental health was also something we were very concerned about for the children. And so bringing the children out and having some fun with them was very, very impactful. Of course, they have fallen back in their curriculum like every other child. So we were really hopeful that we will start our work again, and we were doing that from about last year. For the about 4 or 5 months, we had started to ease up on the lockdown requirements, and at least with our health services and our skill training efforts, we had started that pretty impactfully. Of course, again, right now, everything is back to it because it came very quickly. It came in a way that we could not quite anticipate. The variant was just very strong. So we have, of course, stopped all our activities right now, but all our activities are now pivoted to bringing support to the villagers. So whether it is our schools, teachers, whether it is our healthcare workers, who are, of course, very much on the forefront of everything, and our skill training centers, everything has shifted into COVID mode. So one of the big things we are working right now is our skill training centers, the tailoring center, computer center. We are now transforming them into COVID action centers, where in case we need help for some patient who might be more serious, to come there, whether it is to need to quarantine, whether it is to get little extra services. In fact, we are putting oxygen concentrators in those COVID centers. That is where we might go with it and try to provide more services. So all our work right now is really transformed into becoming COVID support. Our teachers are being empowered to give information in the villages. One of our biggest work is really to try to see, can we prevent the problem before it happens? And thus, we are really working on a very intense information campaign training our villagers, providing the right information, and hopefully soon, when vaccinations are becoming available, our villagers will be prepared to take them. That is another very, very big challenge that we were facing before, where the villagers were not understanding the value of vaccination. So we are really working very hard to put all our resources that we have right now on the ground to make sure that COVID is being addressed in multitudes of ways.
So, Ranjani, let's talk about you for a minute. How did you get involved in this work? And tell me about your background.
I actually have a degree in computer science, and I used to, before joining ACL, I used to work at MIT in education technology. So, this idea of online education and all, I was very much involved in it right from the very beginning. And of course, coming from India, what brought me here really was education. And my father went to a village school like the one that I'm supporting right now. He had nothing. And later, because of that school, he went on to become dean at IIT Bombay, which is like an MIT in India. So I saw the potential that single teacher school can make in the life of somebody who is willing to learn. And thus, as I was looking to give back, this organization really touched me deeply. So when my children got off my payroll, as in when they graduated from college and did not need my immediate support, I decided to quit my job at MIT and joined ACL as its executive director, with the very vision that I felt that there is a great opportunity to bring technology to make a difference. And really, we've been very happy that, now when I started, we have these ACL on wheels, which we now have 36 of them running in the villages. Now we are trying to bring tablets into the villages. And I'll just tell you one touching moment. I took a laptop for the first time into a village, and I was amazed how quickly the kids, they had never seen a laptop, but they really took to it very easily and very quickly. And one of the girls told me, "Sister, I'm so touched that you brought this because you have allowed us to touch the future." And I really felt very moved, because without digital literacy, they are now out of the future. So it has become a human right, not just literacy, but digital literacy is also a human right. And I feel very, very blessed that I have this opportunity to bring it to very underprivileged people. And the opportunity that technology provides, you may not have a road, but if you have a cell phone with some connectivity, you can indeed connect to the world. And I think that opportunity is there. And I'm so honored that maybe I can bring it to the 100,000 villages.
So, how did you find out about the organization? Was it just through a search or something? Or
Actually, I'm very in the Boston area. I'm very involved in the Indian American community. I also
I
run
see.
a community newsletter here, which goes out to about 40,000 people in our group. And so when this organization wanted to raise more funds, wanted to expand, so they were in about 10,000 villages, and they had a dream to go to more villages. And they said, in order to do that, they need more funds. So they came, one of their volunteers came to America and talked about the organization here and said, I want to get started here. And so once it got started, people approached me to spread the word, through my little media. And I was very taken with the organization, and I started to become a contributor. And once when I went to India, I visited one of these villages. And when I saw the work that was happening in the village, I was really taken when one of the young women said, they introduced me as coming from America as an engineer and all of these things. And she said, Sister, what would it take to become somebody like you? And I was like, I don't
Hmm.
know. I really,
Wow.
really wanted to make a difference. And she said, what can you do for us? So when I came back, that was in my mind. And here I am. So
Here you are. Did you come across any particular barriers to getting the work done? And let me give you just one example. I understand that there's a law created recently that makes it difficult for a charity to distribute funds it's received to another charity. So, Ekal, for instance, may have difficulty sharing funds that it's received with another organization. Are there ways to work around that, or am I not characterizing that correctly?
no, you are right that there is a law that has come into force that says that, actually, I think the law was put in place in order to handle many challenges that the charities were bringing. As you can imagine, the well intentioned ones were doing great work, but there was also a lot of negative problems that were happening. So
Yeah.
people who were claiming they wanted to do one thing were funding something different through this mechanism of we are funding this charity, but the money is going to something else. So I think the law was well intentioned and put in place for that. For us particularly, it's not a problem because we have a ground organization. We have three ground organizations we are directly connected to. One is for the health, one is for education and skill training. And in fact, all those three organizations are under this umbrella of Ekal, but they are very legal organizations with the right FCRA, which is they have all the right rules for that. So for us, yes, it is a little more challenging because now I cannot just give the money to the schools and say, hey, give it to the health arm. I cannot do that. I have to be very clear in who I am giving the money to and for what. So that little transfer has become a challenge. But it is okay for us. It's not a big problem because we are not just subcontracting to other agencies. So for us, this difficulty is very, very little. For it is our own base that we are working with. So it's not a challenge for us at all. For some other people, it might be, but I am told that if you could be well intentioned, I think it's not difficult. That's what I'm hearing from people, that the law is well intentioned, and if you're doing it in the right way, it can be done. But particularly for us, it's not a challenge.
Very good. Well, I want to know if you could cover this mission fully. What would that take? And what is it that you really would like to see happen with your organization, let's say over the next 5 years?
Beautiful question. I often wake up in the morning and vision that because that's what keeps me going every single morning. And the vision I have is that these villages, everybody will have access to basic human needs: a decent house to live in, water that is not polluted, and basic access to education and some means of economic empowerment so that they don't have to leave the village. Currently, the big challenge is many of them have to go out into the cities, and there they live in slums and don't have a quality of life that is really a reasonable one. If they had economic opportunity in their own village where they are surrounded by their loved ones, India will certainly be a better place. So it is really my dream that in 5 years, 5 years is maybe a short time, but still there's nothing that prevents us from dreaming that the 100,000 villages, we will have economic opportunities in a manner especially enabled by e-commerce and other things where the villagers can do their productive activity in the village while connecting with a market that is global and thus giving them the income that they deserve to live a full life. Also, with technology and with other means, I hope they can get the information that they need to actually understand what is the way to live healthy life, what is the way to all the new advances in agriculture. All of these information, if that comes to you, it is a knowledge economy, and we know that with information you can really be enriched. So we are really working very hard at transforming these villages in this way. I'll just mention one very interesting initiative that we have taken up. It is called grain, which is to make all these villages self-sustaining. At the end of the day, I want all our work to be off of charity payrolls. So, in order to achieve that, what we are doing is actually working with our farmers who produce, by the way, great organic food. Their growth, because it's very virgin land there. So, we are collecting produce like turmeric, for example, and then we are processing it and we are selling it into the premium markets in the cities for which they didn't have access to before. By doing this, not only can we give them a good income for the farmer who often is not given the right income by the middlemen who are working to collect their produce, we can give the farmers a good income, but also plow back into all the work that we are doing so that we don't have to go and ask for charitable contribution from anybody. So there is a methodology here. If COVID hadn't struck, of course, we would have been in a probably much further along than we are now. But it's still my hope that COVID God's willing, that we will really go on this path. And there is a methodology, and we hope to accomplish this in 5, maybe 7 years now that we have COVID a little slowing us down.
Well, that's a beautiful vision. And while I know your objective is to become independent of donations, I hope that there's always a pathway for people to feel the wonderful warmth and hopefulness when they're able to make a donation to an organization like yours that is doing work that frankly very few are doing, and work that obviously needs to be done, work that can transform a life, work that can take a person like your father to a place where he could not only provide for his family but be a leader in his community. So I hope that there's always an opportunity, even as you become successful, for people to show their hearts by giving to your organization. And I am just going to hold out prayer that the situation in India in general improves quickly, and that some of the tragic stories that we're hearing in some of the cities do not filter into some of the more rural areas. And I suspect if we're successful, it will not only be due to our prayers, it'll be due to the great work that you're doing, spreading the word and getting the right information to people about how to protect themselves from COVID. So I want to just thank you just for joining me for this podcast. And we want to do everything we can to get the word out to Americans here for how they can be helpful, where they can be helpful, and what ways they can be helpful. And I know that many of them will consider what you're doing because it's on the ground. That's the secret. You're there with people where they are, where they need help. So again, thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And yes, go to ekal.org, and there will be always a need to for some donations to do new things. Even though we might be self-sufficient in doing certain current things, it's going to be some time before we achieve that dream. So really grateful to anybody who considers donating to our organization and supporting those that are really, really underprivileged and kind of unreached right now. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I truly appreciate it.
Well, Ranjani, again, thank you. I've been with Ranjani Saigal, who is the executive director of Ekal, and we've heard about the great work that they're doing, and we want to continue to wish them continued success. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Giving podcast. You can find us on all major podcast platforms, and I hope you do. Thanks for listening.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. Send your comments and ideas to nona@thusmarket.com. That's nona@thusmarket.com. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.